Beneath Baldur's Gate, far below its crowded streets and guarded estates, stone corridors hold those whom the city would rather forget. Some are guilty, some insist they are not. Others have learned that innocence and freedom are not always the same thing. Among the prisoners are 4 strangers whose paths have crossed behind locked doors. Each arrived in the city by a different road. Each carries a different accusation, and each has left something beyond the bars, an unfinished purpose, a hidden truth, or a debt still waiting to be paid. First among them is Boltax. At 7 feet and 6 inches tall and weighing nearly 400 pounds, the 34-year-old Goliath towers over prisoners and guards alike. Boltax is a giant even among Goliaths, thick shoulders, broad chest, and hands like blacksmith's hammers. His arms are covered in old scars from knives, arrows, and mountain beasts. His face, however, has not been seen in years. Encasing his head is a seamless ebony helmet, polished to an almost mirror-black finish. There are no straps, hinges, or visor. The helmet simply exists as though it grew around his skull. Only 2 narrow slits glow faintly from within. No spell has removed it, no smith has damaged it, no amount of force has loosened it. He eats and drinks somehow, he sleeps, he breathes. The helmet simply refuses to leave him. Boltax was born among the mountain tribes of Kara-Tur. While other Goliaths valued conquest, Boltax found discipline. He entered a secluded monastery where strength was considered the highest expression of harmony. Their philosophy rejected speed and elegance. A perfect strike was one that required no second attempt. The monks trained by carrying boulders uphill, wrestling oxen, and meditating beneath icy waterfalls. Strength was truth. The monastery was isolated, but not blind. Merchants, smugglers, and assassins all crossed the mountain passes. Boltax occasionally served as an escort through dangerous territory. Over the years, he developed relationships with thieves' guilds, criminal brokers, and secret societies throughout Kara-Tur. He never became a criminal, he simply became someone everyone could trust to honor his word. One day, a wealthy foreign mage sought him out. The mage claimed his daughter had been kidnapped by enemies within Kara-Tur. He needed someone with both strength and underworld connections. Boltax accepted. The search lasted weeks. He bribed crime lords. He fought river pirates. He crossed haunted mountains. Eventually he found the girl. But he was too late. She died during the rescue. Only afterward did Boltax learn the truth. The father had never wanted her rescued. She had betrayed him. Her death was part of a ritual dedicated to Bane, the god of tyranny, fear, and domination. Boltax had unknowingly become the final piece in the sacrifice. The mage never attacked. Instead, he thanked Boltax. Then he placed a black iron helm upon his head. May every face you meet remind you of the one you failed to save. The metal flowed like liquid. When it hardened, it had become part of him. No blade can pry it loose. No lock exists. No spell has broken it. Some priests claim the curse is sustained not by Bane's power, but by Boltax's own guilt. 3 nights ago, Boltax was summoned by Nadir al-Sahir. Nadir had arranged a meeting with Magistrate Edric Vaughan, a respected official who had secretly been investigating corruption within Baldur's Gate. The magistrate had recently acquired an old journal once belonging to the Banite mage, who had cursed Boltax decades earlier. He believed its pages contained clues about the ebony helmet fused to the Goliath's head. The meeting never happened. When Boltax arrived at the magistrate's townhouse, he found the room in ruins. Furniture lay smashed across the floor, blood covered the chamber, and Magistrate Vaughan was dead. Before Boltax could leave or even examine the body, the doors burst open and soldiers of the Flaming Fist stormed into the room. someone had tipped them off. To the authorities, everything pointed to Baltax. He was a 7-foot-tall Goliath who was almost impossible to mistake. He wore the infamous ebony helmet, and witnesses had seen the giant in the black helmet entering the magistrate's townhouse. Baltax had been found alone with the victim. The murder weapon was missing, and his known association with Nadir connected him to Baldur's Gate's criminal underworld. As far as the Flaming Fist was concerned, the case was open and shut. The true killers were members of a hidden Benite cell. They had been watching Baltax ever since he arrived in Baldur's Gate. Magistrate Vaughan had discovered too much about the curse, and was murdered before he could reveal what he knew. Baltax had not been their target. He had been chosen as their fall guy. Nadir possesses influence within Baldur's Gate, but not enough to openly oppose the Flaming Fist. He might be able to arrange an escape, but doing so would condemn Baltax to life as a hunted fugitive. Even if he escaped the prison, the accusation of murder would follow him wherever he went. Instead, Nadir is working behind the scenes, attempting to discover who orchestrated the magistrate's murder and why. When Baltax was arrested, the jailers attempted to remove the ebony helmet. One guard tried to pry it loose with crowbars. Another fetched a master blacksmith. Finally, a priest was summoned to remove the curse. Nothing worked. The guards eventually abandoned their efforts and entered the following note into the prison ledger. The prisoner received a helmet impossible to remove. From that day forward, everyone within the prison began referring to Baltax as the Black Helm. Even imprisoned and stripped of ordinary possessions, Baltax remains an imposing figure. Barefoot, wrapped in dark monastic cloth and carrying the quiet, physical certainty of a mountain-given human form. Corvin Ash presents a very different danger. Corvin Ash has earned a reputation as a skilled relic hunter and explorer, travelling across the Sword Coast in search of forgotten temples, ancient tombs, and long-lost artifacts. Over the years, he has developed a talent for uncovering the secrets of civilizations long since faded into history. During one such expedition, he discovered the mysterious great sword Ashfall, a weapon that has remained at his side ever since. Corvin's most recent commission led him to a newly discovered tomb on the outskirts of Baldur's Gate. According to the information he had been given, the expedition was a legitimate archaeological venture to investigate a site untouched for centuries. Deep within the tomb, Corvin uncovered the Codex Umbra, an ancient tome believed to contain dangerous knowledge and thought to have been lost to history. Before he could leave the tomb, soldiers of the Flaming Fist arrived and placed him under arrest. Ashfall, along with all of his belongings, was confiscated, and Corvin was charged with tomb robbing, unlawful entry into a protected burial site, and the attempted theft of a protected relic. Whether Corvin knowingly broke the law or was deceived into believing the expedition was lawful remains unknown. The truth has yet to be revealed, and only fate will decide whether he is guilty or innocent. For now the Hexblade sits without his blade. Whether that makes Corvin powerless is another matter entirely. The third prisoner is Sir Cedric Vowlan. Sir Cedric Vowlan was born into a minor noble family in Tether, where honour, duty, and loyalty were valued above wealth. From a young age he trained as a knight, swearing to protect those under his care and to uphold the laws of his liege. He married Elena, and together they had a son, Thomas. For a time, life seemed destined to follow the path expected of a noble knight. That life ended when Cedric's family backed the losing side in a political struggle between rival noble houses. When the conflict was over, the crown stripped the Valin family of their lands and title. Cedric was condemned to exile under pain of death should he ever return to Tether. Among those who benefited most from the confiscation of the Valin estate was Lord Garrick Thorne, an ambitious noble who acquired much of the family's former lands. Rumours spread that Garrick had used his influence to ensure the Valen's downfall, though nothing was ever proven. With Cedric exiled and his family's fortunes destroyed, Elena was left alone to raise their young son. Facing poverty and little hope of Cedric's return, she accepted Lord Garrick Thorne's offer of marriage. It was not a choice born of love, but of survival. Garrick gave her security, restored stability to her life, and raised Thomas as his own. Whatever his ambitions had been, he never mistreated either of them. Cedric never blamed Elena. In his mind, she had done what he no longer could: protect their son. The failure, he believed, was his alone. Exile eventually brought Cedric to Baldur's Gate, where he earned a living as a caravan guard, mercenary, and sworn sword. Though stripped of his title, he never abandoned the ideals that had defined him as a knight. Years later, Cedric learned that Lord Garrick Thorne was living in Baldur's Gate. Unable to leave the past behind, he sought him out. The meeting was heated. Witnesses later recalled angry voices and old accusations. Cedric demanded to know whether Garrick had merely profited from his family's ruin or had helped bring it about. The two men parted in anger. By morning, Lord Garrick Thorne was dead. Sir Cedric Valin was arrested and imprisoned in the dungeons beneath Baldur's Gate. Whether he truly killed the man who had taken his family's lands, married his wife and raised his son, or whether someone else committed the murder, while suspicion naturally fell upon him, remains unknown. Only fate will decide whether Sir Cedric Valin is guilty of the crime for which he now awaits judgment. Even after years behind bars, Cedric still believes a knight is measured not by his victories, but by whether he can rise after his greatest failure. The chance to earn a pardon is more than an opportunity to regain his freedom. It is his final chance to prove that the honour he lost was never truly gone. His armour and sword may be beyond his reach, but his bearing remains that of Sir Cedric Valin. The youngest of them was Aidan Vere. Aidan is a 24-year-old wizard, tall and sun-bronzed, with tousled blonde hair and a full golden beard. At first glance he might appear entirely human. A closer look reveals small patches of golden scales along his collarbone and across one arm, physical traces of draconic blood whose origin Aidan has spent much of his life attempting to understand. He studies the school of evocation, seeking discipline strong enough to control the power within him. When he channels flame, his eyes glow like embers, and the air around him shimmers with heat. His most valued possession is the ember-bound grimoire, a spellbook once carried by the woman he knew as his mother. Its pages are written in an elaborate cipher, revealing their secrets slowly and often through unsettling dreams, fragmented memories, the image of a golden dragon, and glimpses of an underground laboratory. Those visions eventually led Aidan to a sealed laboratory within Baldur's Gate. When the authorities arrived, they found fire, shattered glass, unnatural darkness, and dead researchers. Aidan was arrested and accused of unlawful entry, murder, and arson. The truth of what happened inside the laboratory remains uncertain. The Flaming Fist confiscated both the ember-bound grimoire and Aidan's red, hooded cloak of protection. Without them, the young wizard has been left with his questions and with the strange power carried in his blood. The four are not alone beneath Baldur's Gate. During their imprisonment, they have come to know, or at least hear stories about, several other inmates. Each has acquired a reputation within the dungeon, although the truth behind those reputations is far less certain. Raven is a pale half-elf, wrapped in dark cloth and a black, feathered cloak, its hood lined in deep crimson. Her stare is intense, distant and more than a little unsettling. She was arrested at the scene of a massacre where an entire family had been found dead. During questioning, Raven neither confessed to the killings nor denied them. Instead, she insisted that the ghosts of the dead had invited her to a tea party. Raven frequently speaks to a raven that visits the small barred window of her cell, answering the bird in a language few can understand. Whether she communes with spirits, speaks in riddles, or simply inhabits a world of her own is not known. Most of the guards have reached a simpler conclusion. They consider Raven mad as a hatter. The prisoner known as Cap was once a flame, a lieutenant in the Flaming Fist. He is a broad, battle-worn man with greying hair, a thick beard, and the battered presence of a veteran officer. His old golden-black armour bears the marks of long service rather than ceremonial display. Cap attempted to mediate between the criminal organizations of Baldur's Gate and the Flaming Fist officers charged with policing them. He was eventually arrested for accepting bribes and committing treason. The official story paints him as corrupt. Yet no one in authority speaks too loudly about how much worse the streets became after Cap was placed behind bars. Whether he was lining his own pockets or maintaining a fragile peace by methods his superiors could not publicly tolerate remains an open question. Imogen has occupied the dungeons for almost as long as any of them. She's a pale, sharp-featured woman with dark hair beneath a charcoal hood, dressed in practical layers of leather and light armour. Long imprisonment has not made her appear helpless. If anything, it has sharpened the watchfulness in her eyes. Imogen was part of a group that broke into the Archduke's private residence. She was the only member of the gang captured after a fall that nearly killed her. The other thieves escaped. The stolen property was never recovered. No interrogation persuaded Imogen to reveal the names of her companions or the location of the missing loot. Whatever happened during that robbery, she has guarded its secrets through pain, confinement, and the passage of time. Then there is Stavros, a heavy-set man with a broad face, receding dark hair, thick sideburns, and a small pointed beard. Stavros wears a battered green coat over practical leather clothing. A mischievous half-smile rarely seems far from his face. According to a particularly talkative guard, Stavros set fire to a temple of Suna in the undercellar of Baldur's Gate. He escaped the initial blaze, but was captured after turning back to rescue people from the very fire he had started. Stavros possesses a remarkably good singing voice. Sea shanties frequently echo from his cell until the guards drag their clubs along the bars and order him to be silent. At other times he can be heard arguing with someone who never answers loudly enough for anyone else to hear. The exchanges resemble one half of an old married couple's quarrel. Who or what Stavros is speaking to remains unexplained. Although the prisoners are confined beneath Baldur's Gate, they have not been entirely severed from the city above. Beyond the prison walls are people who know their names, remember their pasts, or possess knowledge that may yet prove valuable. Some may be willing to help. Others may simply be waiting to see whether the prisoners ever emerge from the dungeons. In the poorer districts of the city, a young street thief known as Silk survives from one day to the next. She has tangled dark hair, sharp features, and a watchful expression that can shift from weary innocence to quiet mischief in an instant. Her patched sleeves and worn leather clothing allow her to disappear easily among labourers, beggars, and crowded market stalls. Silk understands the alleys and forgotten corners of Baldur's Gate better than most guards ever will. She notices who enters the city, who leaves it, and where careless visitors keep their coin. Anyone speaking with Silk would be wise to keep one hand upon their purse. Elsewhere in Baldur's Gate lives Maurice Tollett, a former retainer of House Volan. Maurice is an older, broad-shouldered man with a bald head, a thick silver moustache, and the disciplined posture of someone who spent much of his life in service to a noble household. His dark tunic and rust-red cloak still bear the understated marks of that former allegiance. Though House Volan has fallen from power, Maurice has not forgotten those he once served. He now lives as a free citizen of Baldur's Gate, carrying memories of the family's past, and perhaps loyalties that survived its downfall. Near the harbour, business of a less respectable nature often passes through the hands of Nadir. A smuggler and accomplished forger, Nadir is recognizable by his shaved head, enormous black beard, deeply lined face, and unsettling red eyes. A single gold hoop hangs from his left ear. Behind closed doors he deals in copied seals, false identities and goods moved through the city without troubling its customs officers. He is cautious, suspicious, and rarely unprepared for betrayal. Nadir claims to live by one simple principle. He betrays no one who has not betrayed him first. Elira Than is a discreet, middle-aged apothecary and alchemist, whose workshop lies somewhere among the crowded streets of Baldur's Gate's lower city. Her dark hair is bound away from an experienced, focused face. She works in a pale shirt, fitted leather apron, and heavy gloves, surrounded by old books, glass vessels, and carefully labelled compounds. Elira approaches alchemy with the patience of a scholar and the caution of someone who understands how little separates medicine from poison or discovery from disaster. She was an old friend of Aidan Vare's foster mother and became one of the few people willing to assist his search for the truth about his origins. Elira supplied him with research materials and helped him investigate the sealed laboratory before the events that led to his arrest. She does not believe the official account of the laboratory explosion. According to Elira, someone deliberately falsified the story, and she has quietly begun searching for the person who ordered the experiments conducted there. Whether she is protecting him, protecting herself, or concealing something more dangerous remains to be seen. For now, these contacts remain beyond the prison walls. Whether they can offer information, assistance, or merely another complication will depend upon what happens next. Then, without warning, the routine of the dungeon changes. The prison warden arrives with his guards. The prisoners were removed from their cells one by one. Heavy iron manacles were fastened around their wrists, each pair joined to the next by a single length of chain. By the time the guards were finished, the prisoners stood together in a line, bound not only to the jail, but to one another. The prison warden led the procession from the dungeons. He was a hard-faced man with iron-grey hair, a heavy jaw, and the weathered expression of someone who had spent years watching hope fade behind locked doors. Worn dark armour covered his broad frame, and a heavy ring of keys hung from his belt. Everything about him was practical: his clothing, his weapons, and the cold efficiency with which he handled those placed in his custody. Guards surrounded him and the prisoners. Several marched along either side of the chain, while others guarded the front and rear. They were not polished, ceremonial soldiers. These were experienced jailers in dark, battered armour, carrying clubs, swords, and crossbows. Their attention remained fixed upon the prisoners as the procession climbed from the cold stone passages beneath the city into the guarded halls above. At last a pair of tall wooden doors opened before them. Beyond lay the Archduke's meeting room. The chamber was large and formal, its high walls hung with the colours and emblems of Baldur's Gate. A long council table dominated the room, while an elevated chair at its far end marked the place reserved for the city's ruler. That chair stood empty. The Archduke was not present. the warden brought the prisoners to a halt before the council table. His guards immediately spread out around them. Some remained close to the chain, while others took position beside the doors and along the walls. Escape was clearly not considered a possibility. Several figures were already waiting. The most prominent among them was Count de Lucerne. The Count was an older man with silver hair swept neatly back from a severe aristocratic face. A carefully trimmed grey beard framed his mouth, while cold, observant eyes studied the newly arrived prisoners without revealing what he thought of them. He wore a rich wine-red cloak secured by restrained silver clasps, expensive enough to proclaim his station, but without the gaudy excess of a man desperate to display his wealth. He carried himself with quiet, deliberate authority. He did not occupy the Archduke's chair, yet the arrangement of the room made it clear that, in the Archduke's absence, Count de Lucerne was the man presiding over this gathering. 3 younger men stood nearby, the Count's sons. Conrad de Lucerne, the eldest, was a tall and broad-shouldered man, with long auburn hair tied behind his head and a well-kept beard. A dark green cloak rested across his shoulders, covering travelling clothes and equipment that showed signs of genuine use. The sword at his side was no courtly ornament. Conrad stood in composed silence, physically imposing without making any effort to draw attention to his strength. He possessed the steady, watchful presence of an experienced warrior, and of an heir who had never needed to question his place within the family. Beside him stood Féroce de Lucerne, the second son. Féroce was a large, stout man with reddish-brown hair, a full beard, and a calm, self-assured expression. His fine leather, velvet, and carefully chosen jewellery marked him as a prosperous merchant rather than a soldier. He was said to be every bit as clever as he was broad, and his measured gaze seemed to assess the prisoners much as he might evaluate an unfamiliar business proposition, considering their value, their risks, and whatever advantage might be gained from them. The third son, Armand de Lucerne, presented a rather different figure. Young and red-haired, Armand wore expensive crimson finery tailored to flatter him. His beard was carefully groomed, his smile appeared thoroughly practised, and a golden goblet rested comfortably in one hand. He was notorious throughout the appropriate circles for his drinking and his pursuit of women, or at least for his repeated attempts at the latter. There was charm in his expression, though perhaps rather more confidence than success behind it. Yet the de Lucerne family was not the strangest sight awaiting the prisoners. Standing slightly apart from the nobles was an elderly wizard. He was tall, with an immense grey beard flowing down over his chest, and long grey hair emerging from beneath a deep purple hood. A heavy purple mantle covered a dark tunic gathered at the waist by a broad leather belt. In one hand he held a plain wooden staff, and faint violet light seemed to gather intermittently around his fingers. To anyone familiar with the stories of the legendary sage of Shadowdale, the resemblance was almost comical. The stranger looked remarkably like an enthusiastic Elminster impersonator. The quiet suggestion of magic surrounding him, however, made it unwise to dismiss him as merely an eccentric old man in a costume. No one offered an explanation for his presence, nor did anyone immediately explain why this particular group of prisoners had been chained together and brought before the Count and his family. For a moment, the only sound in the chamber was the settling of iron links as the prisoners came to a stop. Behind them stood the warden and his guards. Suddenly the heavy iron doors of the meeting room ground open again, and a guard shoved a man inside. He didn't look like a typical hardened dungeon inmate. He appeared to be a sharp-featured half-elf with dark, slightly dishevelled hair and an effortlessly confident posture despite the grim circumstances. He wore the rumpled, once expensive velvet coat of a high city gambler, now stripped of its fine jewellery. His hands were completely bare, no weapons, no arcane focus, not even a single ring on his fingers. He glanced around the room, locked eyes with each of the prisoners, and let out a soft, dry chuckle. He smoothed down his vest, offering a flashy, theatrical bow that mocked the very guards who just escorted him. "Well now," he said, his voice a smooth, melodic purr, dripping with charm. "I was told the Flaming Fist was sending me on a suicide mission, but they neglected to mention I'd be accompanied by such fascinating company. You can call me Corlin. It seems fortune has dealt us all into the same hand. Shall we see who holds the winning cards?" As he stepped forward to join the prisoners, they noticed his eyes were incredibly sharp, tracking every minor movement, every weapon hitch, and every exit in the room. He carried himself like a man who knew a secret you didn't, and who was completely confident he could walk out of any room he entered. Before them waited Count de Lucerne, his 3 sons, and the unidentified wizard. Beyond them, the Archduke's chair remained conspicuously empty. Whatever purpose had brought them there was about to be revealed.